Welcome to the Zumbro Adult Forum this morning. We are delighted you are here. If you appreciate irony like I do, you are not only appreciating the fact that we have donuts on the back table, but also that Girl Scout cookies are on sale up in the narthex. Nothing wrong with Girl Scout cookies or donuts. I approve of both. But they are a great lead-in to this morning's forum. Today we are delighted to have Dr. Mike Jensen, a Zumbro member since 1981, and also an endocrinological. He researches in endocrinology at the Mayo Clinic, and he is the author of the government's recent study on obesity, and he is going to share with us today lots of everything you wanted to know about keeping your body healthy, keeping your weight down, keeping that weight off, how to enjoy Girl Scout cookies and donuts in moderation, and more. So I would like to invite you to welcome Mike Jensen to the Zumbro Forum today.
Thank you. So how many of you have been asked to volunteer to do something? Everybody? Yeah, me too. That's how I got into this. One day in 2008, somebody called me up from National Institutes of Health and asked me to be on this committee that was going to make the new guidelines for obesity evaluation and treatment for the United States. And I thought, well, I've done obesity for a while. I think I know a lot about this. This should be pretty easy. But what I didn't know is how much I didn't know. And I didn't know how long it was going to take. So I ended up on this committee that we met over and over again for about 5 years to go through this process of figuring out, with all the research that's going on in this, what's the stuff that's really quality and what makes a difference to people and their doctors who are worrying about weight problems. And so what I wanted to share with you today is sort of what I learned as part of this guidelines process, and what are the take-home messages for those of us who need to get our weight under control. So the things we wanted to assess are, what are the results you can expect from good non-surgical treatments? We hear a lot in the news about surgery, but what can you expect from a non-surgical treatment from people who are really good at providing that treatment? And then what can you expect from a surgical approach? We looked at that also. We wanted to look at what components of a weight loss management program are the most important. And you can imagine, things like diet, physical activity, and I'll talk to you about, how do we help people with behavioral interventions, and what are doctors who are interested in this and trying to provide a good treatment, what should they be providing to you? So you can imagine one of the things that everybody wanted to know is there a best diet that we can recommend? Because every week there's another diet. You guys have heard of Atkins, right? Zone, American Heart, American Diabetes, all that kind of stuff. And it seems like there's always some newspaper or internet thing that says, oh, this new diet, this is the one to do. And fortunately, we looked at all the studies where there was good long-term comparison, at least a year, between different kinds of diets. And which one do you think won?
None of them.
None of them. None of them. It turns out that if you provide a reasonable calorie loss, so you have people consume less calories than they're burning, and you provide them with the kind of behavioral support, and I'll tell you what I mean by behavioral support, the kind of behavioral support to sustain that change, pretty much everybody loses about the same amount of weight on average in a group. Now, of course, when you have 500 people in a group, that means some people are going to do really well, and some people are not going to do so well. And so what that means is, because there's no one great diet that fits everybody, what it means is, unless that diet is specifically harmful for you, if you can follow it and it seems to be working, it's probably pretty reasonable. So in a way, that gives us a lot more flexibility and freedom. So a doctor who tells you, you only can eat, you can only what you follow in this diet, because that's the only one that works, is probably a little out of date, because we know that we do have lots of different kinds of approaches that people can take and succeed over the long run. Obviously, physical activity is important, but what we learned about this is that in terms of losing that weight to start with, and most people, if they do change eating habits, they'll get most of that weight loss in the first 6 to 12 months. It's very hard to continue to lose weight after that. What does physical activity do? Because it's hard to burn that many calories. Unless you're training for a marathon, you really hardly can burn enough calories to not catch up with eating. So what we learned about physical activity is that people can gradually increase their physical activity over the course of that 6 to 12 months. And once they've gotten up to a certain level, what happens? It becomes easier to keep the weight off. It's not that it helps you lose weight so much, but that when you stay active, you keep from regaining that weight. And the nice thing about having that time is you don't have to rush in and change everything at once. Physical activity habits take a while to change. It takes a while to build things into your daily routine that are sustainable. So there's no big rush to do that. Eating habits we find pretty easy to make that short-term change. I would guess many people in here have tried a diet at one time or another, and it may be pretty easy for the first day or for the first week or maybe even for the first month, and then it kind of gets a struggle. It may be boring, it may be you don't like the food that much, you're tired of it, you went on vacation, whatever. If you're doing it on your own, most of us aren't that great at changing our eating habits permanently. And that's where the area of behavioral science has been evolving to help us make changes in habits. Let me ask you guys a question. Who in here feels like they've got reasonably good control over eating habits, that they can pretty much make choices that they want to make? Okay. So, how many people had fruit when they came in? Apple fritter doesn't count. Yeah, nobody probably had fruit when you came in because that wasn't an option, right? We had a few options there, but it was sort of between different kinds of sweet rolls. And so one of the things that we talk about when we talk about behavior, it's recognizing what influence the environment has on your behavior. And most of us tend to assign to ourselves more control over things than we may really have, because we don't always appreciate exactly how much influence the environment has on our choices. So we only had a couple of choices back there, and you could either choose to have the sweet roll or not. And so one of the things that the behaviorists are trying to help people who participate in these programs learn is to recognize those things in the environment that are driving our behavior. So what we found out is that it takes a lot of time for people to pick up these behavioral skills. You can't do it in a week typically. You can't do it in a month typically. In fact, what we found out is the best programs that people participate in that really result in long-term success take 14 sessions over 6 months and continue to work with the people for at least a year, preferably longer. That's to help build up those skills about recognizing how you are responding to food, responding to the environment, and allow people to keep that weight off for the long term. you hear a lot of negative things, and even from doctors, about you can't lose weight, it's impossible, just take this pill or go have surgery. It turns out that the good treatment programs, people lose about 9 to 10% of their weight and can keep it off for quite a long time. I'm talking years and years and years. Now, if you're like most of my patients, 10% doesn't sound like that much. Because most of my patients want to get down to what they weighed in high school. And they may be 50 pounds overweight, so they just think that it's necessary to lose that entire 50 pounds. And there are different reasons to lose weight. Some people want to lose weight because they want to look better. Other people want to lose weight because they know they've got a family history of diabetes, or they're starting to get diabetes, or they got high blood pressure or high cholesterol. They want to lose weight for health reasons. It turns out that if you're at risk for diabetes, if you just lose about 5% of body weight, you cut your risk of going on to diabetes by over 50%. If you lose 10% of your weight, which is about average for most of the good programs out there, you cut your risk by 85% of moving on to diabetes. You lower your blood pressure, you improve your blood fats, you get off medications. So the 10% weight loss that most of my patients would poo-poo because it's not enough, from the physician's perspective, has huge health benefits. So how did you get this 10% weight loss if it really is that important? And what the good programs will do is they'll work with people over that 6 to 12 months to help them learn about the two kinds of the environment that affect our choices, our behavior. Behavior in terms of eating habits, choosing the things you want to choose the most that you know is going to improve your health and lower your weight, and increasing your physical activity. So I volunteered to give this talk. It means I get to stand here and walk around. So I'm getting a little bit of physical activity, and you guys are having to sit. Unless you go up to get another donut. But, so the two kinds of environment, I already told you about one. It's the physical environment. And it's teaching people to recognize the things that they catch themselves doing, saying, oh, I didn't want to do that. How did I end up eating that bag of potato chips that I told myself I wasn't going to eat? And kind of track back and say, well, what was it that triggered me to do that? And to figure ways to disrupt that environmental trigger. And because there's so many possibilities, you're essentially teaching people to be their own detectives. And since most of us aren't trained in being detectives, that takes a while to do. There's another kind of environment, and that's this kind of environment, right? How we think about ourselves and our behavior can affect it. The most common thing that I hear from my patients is, well, I blew it. As long as I've blown it, I might as well just give up. Whether it's for the day or for the whole thing. And to some extent, women more than men tend to beat themselves up about this. They tend to be too hard on themselves when they have a lapse. And so it turns out that the behaviorists have learned good things about how to train yourself to think in a more positive way, to get rid of the negatives and to emphasize the positives. And I'll tell you, trained in endocrinology, not trained in behavioral medicine, I kind of poo-pooed that. I said, oh, you can't train yourself to rethink that. But then I had my patients who started going to our program that we have at Mayo now, and they would tell me the most helpful thing they learned was positive self-talk when things didn't go well, rather than beating themselves up on the negative with regards to their eating and activity habits. They would reinforce the positive, and it kept them going when in the past they would have given up because they felt like they were a failure, when what they really had was a lapse. It was sort of like Pastor's sermon today, saint and sinner. If you sin, does that mean you should just give up? No, you can ask for forgiveness and keep going and try to get better. So those were some of the things we learned. That a really state-of-the-art program, which thankfully we now have in Rochester, you can expect some pretty reasonable success, both short-term and long-term, at losing weight because you learn how to work eating habits into your life that are comfortable, that are sustainable, and learn how to gradually improve the amounts of physical activity you get to help keep that weight off. And by recognizing those environmental things, we take it away from being purely willpower. If we had a willpower pill that we could sell, we could be trillionaires, right? And unfortunately, we can't, so we can't really rely on our patients to just have willpower every day, day in and day out. It's better to have control of your environment, so you really don't have to exercise that willpower. So I think the message is good programs have good results these days. But good programs actually are pretty intense. We can't just have a visit to one of our dietetics colleagues once or twice or three times and expect the same kind of results of a very intensive long-term program. But this gets me now to the last thing I wanted to share with you about, well, who should try to participate in some of these programs? And that's why I've got the fruit on the board. And it's not because I just want you eating fruit. It turns out that some of us, when we gain weight, put it on here. Men mostly, some women. Some people put it on here. And of course there's the whole range in between. It's interesting, we're about the only species that has this kind of dual fat gain ability. And it turns out that people who gain weight, mostly hip and thigh, do it by making new fat cells pretty easily. And the people who gain weight like this, their fat cells get bigger, mostly in here, and they don't make so many new fat cells here. So what's the difference? It seems like our bodies do okay, keeping us away from diabetes and high blood pressure and things like that, if we gain weight like this. But if we gain weight like this, that seems to be the kind of weight gain that predisposes to all those metabolic problems I just mentioned: diabetes, high blood pressure, high blood fats, sleep apnea, things that can actually shorten our lives and make them a lot less pleasant. So in terms of health benefits from a weight loss program, these folks may be pretty happy because they're leaner, but these are not only going to be happy because they're leaner, but they're going to have less risk of developing these chronic medical problems that are going to have you come in to see me. So these are, the reason I bring this up is this is what Mayo Clinic has actually contributed the most to our understanding of weight and how it affects our health. We haven't necessarily been the leader in dramatic new medications or treatments or things like that, but what Mayo has contributed is our understanding of how this kind of fat gain and the benefits of this kind of fat loss contributes to our overall ability to work with people who want to, need to, or both get their weight down. So I think what we learned from looking at all the papers that have been published is there's no one diet. There is no one physical activity program. But what makes any program most likely to help the largest number of people is it's got to be there for them week after week after week for at least 6 months with some additional follow-up for another 6 months, because these habits are hard to change. And you need people who really are expert in delivering this kind of educational approach in order for people to get the most out of it. So, I mean, that's what I learned, is that not to be pessimistic about medical approaches for weight loss, because we're getting more and more successful, that if you have the right resources, you can really help people a lot, and you don't have to stick people with a single diet. You don't have to have a single kind of physical activity program that everybody has to follow. So I tried to be kind of broad about this, because I wanted to leave lots of time for specific questions that you all might have, to pin me down on specific things to find out if we do or do not know about it. And so at this point, I'd like to open it up for people who have questions.